So Kevin, this is our second podcast. The first time you put the magnifying glass on me, and now I get to do the same to you. You have a very interesting story to tell, and through the years we've known each other, I've not only appreciated your leadership on the civilian side as a leader of a nonprofit, but having been in the Marine Corps myself for as long as I did, I see how you've taken what was some great leadership talent in the Marine Corps and applied that. And I always appreciate that because that's why I like working for Marines. You know what you're getting. So
I appreciate that too. I actually wore a blazer today for my interview. I figured I'd dress up for the occasion since I got to interview you first, so I kind of one-upped you a little bit. But I also had time to reflect a little bit, so kind of thinking about what we talked about in the first podcast, since we talked about your service. I think the thing that stuck with me the most was this comment about intersections, right? And how our lives, even before we knew each other 10 years ago, when we first started working together in this space and helping military families and veterans and service members, our lives had intersected in lots of different ways that we didn't know about. And to me, that's what this podcast is all about. It's about people who inspire others and care about others through service, and how their lives start intersecting. And a lot of the people who we're going to be talking to over the next several months are people whose lives have intersected with us too. And we'll start to see how this solidarity of service has spread from just two people knowing each other, and how those things start to intersect throughout the organizations we work with and in people's lives, like one person at a time, and how that spreads across the country. So I'm really excited about that, and I'm really excited about you asking me questions today instead of the opposite.
one of the things that people notice about you that are fortunate enough to meet you in person is that you're very passionate, not only in the way you deliver your message of service and inspiration to others, but you're a great example for perhaps young leaders or not so young leaders who feel like in this time in our country, it's important to pivot away from things that were self-focused and look at communities as our responsibility. We can't wait on somebody else to come in and fix the problems that we face. We have to fix many of them ourselves. And from the moment I met you, the first time I saw you deliver a speech at the chamber, that was apparent. That's just who you are. This didn't have to become an epiphany for you in this time. This was what you were built to do. So I think you're the right leader at the right time for what we're trying to do here at Operation Gratitude. But in order for us to really find ways to emulate you, we have to know you. So we're going to peel back some layers a little bit and figure out what made you the leader you are today, and what were some of the lessons or things you learned along the way that perhaps will help us understand in our own walks how we can get there. And I want to start with one of the questions that you and I hear a lot. It's about what made us decide to join the toughest organization of the branches, arguably. You were a Marine officer. You did a career in the Marine Corps, but it started somewhere. And I talked to you about where it started for me, but what made you decide to join that branch of service? And do you think it was a right choice early on in your career when you began to understand what it was about?
Yeah, so, I mean, this question is easy for me to answer because I grew up with a father who was a Marine, who is a Marine. And, you know, we say that all the time, right? We never use the past tense. But my father very rarely talked about his service. He served in the 60s, which is a really challenging time in our country. We know a lot of Vietnam veterans. And I can only remember growing up when my father talked about his service in the Marine Corps, I could see his face light up. But moreover, I remember him getting on the phone with Marines he had served with. And I remember him being a different person. Like, not just his face lighting up, but the way he talked and the way the pride in his voice. And I realized there was something to that. I can't really put my finger on what the decision point was, other than remembering those conversations. And when I got to the age of 18 and I was looking at schools to go to and what I wanted to do, I told my dad I wanted to serve like him. And I can't forget my mom. I think oftentimes children of service members who talk about why they decided to serve, which is not an uncommon thing in our country, they forget the other half of the equation, and my mother played a big role in my decision to serve. A very devout Christian woman, Catholic. I grew up in a Catholic family, and my mom instilled in me the golden rule, right? To love your neighbor and to walk in someone else's shoes, to treat others how you'd want to be treated. And she really, probably equally to my father, taught me the importance of service. She served every day as a mother, as a person in the community who genuinely cared about them as individuals, because that was important to her. So I think one of the biggest things I learned from my mother is empathy, and I think it's one of the most important things we can do as leaders is be empathetic towards other people every day of our lives. So it's a little bit of a combination of both of my mom and dad. That's the reason I decided to become a Marine and serve.
So we had kids that served and currently serve. I wonder though, what was it like when you saw your dad for the first time as a Marine? What was his reaction, and how did you feel being the embodiment of this mysterious part of him that he didn't talk a lot about? What was that like?
You know, I can just remember him again, standing taller. I guess the one thing that will really stick in my mind forever was the day I was commissioned. You know, we talked about you reading your daughter's oath. Well, my father drove up with my mother to the College of the Holy Cross where I was commissioned. At the time, my Marine officer instructor was a Major Joe Dunford. So this is the officer who became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who was presiding over the commission. And my dad stood before me, and he administered the oath of office, raised his right hand, and he got about halfway through and started to cry. Mm-hmm. And not just cry, but really cry, because he was really proud. And I'll never forget that moment. It was also cool because General Dunford, Major Dunford at the time, had to finish the oath, which is kind of nice. I can say the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff one day was the officer that administered my oath of office, but it was more about my dad being there that day and knowing what that meant to him. And then later, hearing my son say the same oath at Parris Island. So, and crying just as much as my dad did that day too. So it's a telling moment, because to me, that was the start point. Mm-hmm. Knowing that I had made the right decision, that would be a constant reminder that I did the right thing for the right reasons.
Now, my daughter's only a midshipman, so I don't have to salute her yet. Did your dad have to salute you, or was it, I don't know what his rank was, but was it the situation?
No, he never saluted me, and I'll always think of him as sir. My dad, on the day I was commissioned, also gave me his Marmaluke sword, which you know because you carried one. It's a sword that every officer carries, and in the side of that sword is his name. And when they made the sword in the 60s, they actually used acid to engrave the person's name. And the day I retired, he had that put in a shadow box, and on Zoom calls it hangs behind my head. And it's, again, a constant reminder of my roots and my own dad's service, and now my son's service, and as he wraps up his time in the Marine Corps too.
Wow, I love tradition, and especially when it's a family legacy, where it can carry forward and subsequent generations get the
Three generations, 3 proud generations.
Wow.
Yeah.
So let's talk about when you got your commission. You began your service. You and I served during some pretty hard times for this country. We had 9/11 happen. We had a lot of things happen between that. But what was it like when you served? What were some of the things you remember most in your, did you do 20 years?
20 years. 20 years and 5 days.
20 years and 5 days, so many hours, minutes. But what were some of the things you'll remember most? And what was it like throughout? Just, did it live up to your expectations? Things like that.
Yeah, I think my career started out like so many others in the early 90s. I was a young second lieutenant who served in Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm, the first Gulf War, and was in the Combat Arms MOS, serving in an artillery battalion. And the first half of my career was really focused on operations and the challenges that we faced with the first Gulf War and also coming out of that war. But I had a really different second half of my career, and I was really, really fortunate to have a mentor in the Marine Corps who served at a very high level, who was actually one of my mentors early on in my career when I was a first lieutenant and deployed with the Marine Expeditionary Unit. He was then Colonel Jones. He became General Jones. He was the 32nd Commandant of the Marine Corps, and I became his aide at NATO. And through that position, was able to deploy to 50 countries in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. We averaged 285 days a year traveling around the world, and back here to the United States, obviously, to brief Congress, to meet with senators and members on the Hill, to go to the Pentagon, all those things. So it was quite intense, but really a pivoting moment for me because I got to see the highest level of our government and learned a lot in the process. And then I was really, really fortunate, and it informed a lot of the work I did later, to run a division in Headquarters Marine Corps, which was called MMEA. We use acronyms for everything in the Marine Corps, right? But I was responsible for the enlisted assignment monitors, the detailers. And these are the 60 most senior people in the Marine Corps by occupational field. And they assign 172,000 Marines worldwide. And it was just a fascinating experience. We're also responsible for retaining those Marines, or also responsible for releasing them, right? Once they separate from the Marine Corps into the private sector, back into America. And I talked to thousands of transitioning service members in that role. A lot of people don't know that only a quarter of Marines after their first 4-year stay as Marines.
Wow. We
keep a very young force. So 3/4 of the Marines I was talking to in the process of trying to get the best ones to re-enlist, 3/4 of them were actually leaving. And I had a lot of candid discussions with them. And then my last year in the Marine Corps, I worked on the peace process in the Middle East, again under General Jones when he was the special envoy for President Bush. And I was attached to the State Department, and we worked directly for Secretary Rice. And I got to deploy to the Middle East for almost the entire year in 2008 and lived in Israel. And really was a great job to transition out of the Marine Corps. And I felt good about transitioning. It felt really bad saying goodbye to my kids for that year. But I also, because I was with General Jones at NATO from 2003 to 2006, felt like I did not do my part in deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan, even though General Jones and I made dozens of trips there for NATO training mission in Iraq and for the turnover of the provincial reconstruction teams from American forces to NATO forces. But I felt like I had to do my part, and that was a great way to have a capstone to my career and try to solve for an issue that is really the linchpin for a lot of the other challenges that we have in the region. So it was also critical because it helped me transition as a service member to the private sector, because I had a mentor who had lots of connections, and my transition was easy, which is also another part of the story of how I found other service after the Marine Corps.
So we're gonna touch on that, but I have a question that centers around your mentor, James Jones, who he was the commandant who introduced the Marine Corps Martial Arts program to the Marine Corps in an attempt to make Marines more ready, regardless of their MOS. But he was also the commandant the day we were attacked on 9/11, and the next day when the Marine Corps had immediately adopted a new mission. Where were you when that happened? What went through your mind when that happened? And how did it change the way you either look at the world, look at your service, and maybe even the support back home and the families that had to sit and wait for you to either come home or call throughout your career?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think everyone listening probably remembers where they were on 9/11 of 2001. And I was actually an operations officer in a Marine Artillery Battalion at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And I remember the day because I was walking down the hallway in the H-style buildings that we have in Camp Lejeune, the brick buildings, and I was coming from the administrative office past the intelligence officer's vault. He actually stayed, his workspace was inside a safe. And I remember as I passed the safe, there were a handful of lieutenants, and they were watching the television. And I thought they were watching a movie. I could see the World Trade Center, I could see the smoke, and I said, hey, get back to work, Marines. And they turned, right? And they turned to look at me, and their eyes were bright, and they were white. And I realized what had happened, and I rushed to the CEO's office. Really my true mentor in the Marine Corps, a guy named Steve Hanscom, and I told him what had happened. And we were on lockdown, the entire base shut down. And I remember feeling two things. I remember feeling helpless. I remember feeling helpless as a Marine who was here watching our first responders die and not being able to help. And I remember being saddened as a husband and a father of three boys for the families that would be left behind. I remember feeling helpless and sad and scared for my own kids, scared for our country. And this is what's really special about my role with Operation Gratitude now. On 9/11 this year and last year, I actually got to deliver care packages that were assembled by grateful Americans. Last year, in 2019, they were assembled by New Yorkers, and we delivered them here in Washington, D.C. to the Pentagon Police. This year, grateful Americans in Washington, D.C., in the middle of a COVID crisis, assembled care packages, 8,831. See, even a Marine can remember a big number. And we delivered those care packages to every police officer, firefighter, and EMT in Washington, D.C., Arlington Police and Fire Department, the Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority, and every police officer and firefighter in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And I didn't feel helpless anymore. I didn't feel sad because I was given an opportunity to look police officers, firefighters, and EMTs in the eyes and say, thank you for your service. Sherman, I met a firefighter that was in Station 6 of the Arlington Fire Department, Captain Justin Torelli. He was a rookie, not even a year as a firefighter. It was the first day he drove a ladder truck with a 30-year veteran firefighter sitting next to him. They were responding to a fire in Roslyn, and they got the call. You could just picture it, this 30-year veteran with a cigarette in his mouth, as Justin told me, saying, take a left turn here, take a right turn here. He told me how he crawled towards the danger 3 times and was repelled by the fire. I met a firefighter at Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority who was on the roof of the Pentagon that day. Wow. You remember the picture with the flag hanging over the side? And I got to realize that in my current role and really, I guess, get over what was an experience that I had on 9/11 19 years ago.
It's really easy to overlook what it means to run toward danger at a time when first responders are in a different space with respect to their role in society. Police officers, of course, are essentially being held accountable for what maybe 1 or 2 bad apples did, and nurses and doctors sit on the front lines of the COVID crisis in many ways, putting their lives in danger. And you juxtapose that to almost 20 years ago, where everybody was sort of paralyzed in place with fear, and the only people that you could see moving were those who had to do that. That was their job. Whether they signed up for it or not, That was their job, and it's not so long ago. We have people, like you said, who remember where they were, and of course they're here today thinking about what's going on right now. But it's not strange. It's almost sad that we forget the lessons of history and have to deal with things like we're seeing today. But you named a few people who influenced you, and some of them were probably in the Marine Corps in those moments you talked about. And you mentioned General Jones. You mentioned another individual who was your mentor. And now that I can see what kind of leader you are, either who were some of the others or what were the ways they influenced you? What was it about them that you carry forward into your current leadership role?
Yeah, I think this is probably the greatest thing about being a United States Marine. We're influenced by so many people in our lives, and I mentioned some pretty extraordinary people in General Joe Dunford and General Jim Jones, and we're also influenced by the younger Marines who we serve with because they're leaders too. So it's almost like this 360, this bubble that's around you, and you're constantly getting a leadership lesson. But I have to go back to Steve Hanscom and my service with him, because as a young lieutenant after the Gulf War, he became the new battery commander in the Marine Artillery Battalion. I was a lieutenant when he was a captain. And then I was his operations officer when he was a battalion commander. I became his executive officer, and our COO, Paul Cuccinata, became the operations officer when I became the executive officer. And Steve Hanscom was a leader by example, and probably had more influence on me than any other officer in the Marine Corps. It would be easy for me to talk about General Jones and the time I had with him, but as I reflect back on my service, it was Steve Hanscom who taught me everything that I applied today as a leader outside of the military and as a nonprofit leader. And it's the typical things that we look for in Marine leaders. I think he was fearless in his leadership. He was always the first one up and the last one to bed. He always empowered Marines to lead. He gave them that autonomy. He set gigantic goals, and even if we didn't think we could achieve them, after we did, we realized that why he did that, and that's really been the way I've approached, leading 3 nonprofits now. It's because of those lessons that I learned that I never really thought about as a young lieutenant,
Right.
or that I never really thought about as a major when I was serving with him. But they used to call him Yoda because he was the most technically proficient artillery officer in the Marine Corps, but it was really the softer skills, his leadership skills that I learned from every day. And that battalion was the best unit that I've ever served in. And even today, and you've been in organizations like this and units like these, those Marines reach out to me and Steve Hanscom and Paul and say the same thing.
Right.
It was the best experience they ever had in their life, and they've gone on to be leaders in the private sector, in the government, in nonprofits, because they were groomed by a person who really showed them what leadership is.
Right.
With his actions, which is something you hear me say all the time: actions speak louder. I'll never forget his leadership and those times in the Marine Corps. It informs me every day.
Right. One of the biggest thrills of my life was to meet my senior drill instructor much later in life when I got to lead an organization. And I wanted to show him that those seeds he planted at that point would have been about 20 years ago. He had long been out of the Marine Corps, but it went somewhere, and it went long past that experience. Did your influence, the individual who influenced you, get to see the fruits of his labor, whether he was aware of it or not? Did he get to see you in action later on?
I think it goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning, what I realized when we talked in the first podcast, are these intersections. He later became the head of separations and retirements for the Marine Corps when I was in enlisted assignments, but it's really what happened after. I can probably cite several hundred emails, phone calls, texts that I've gotten from other Marines who continue their service after they leave as veterans, because he showed them what real service is too, not just real leadership.
Right.
And those intersections are happening all the time, all the time. And he sees it. He'll text me, or he'll text Paul Cucinato, our COO, and say how proud he is, which means a lot too. And listen, the greatest gift we can give people is mentorship. So I spoke to General Jones last week. I'm going to meet with him for lunch. And they're inspired. I mean, this is the thing. It's like the grasshopper story too, right? They're inspired by seeing young leaders step up in different roles, and they want to hear more. And they're just equally as proud of what their peers, what their subordinates achieve as their own achievements. So it's pretty remarkable to see that. And I think this transcends the Marine Corps. I think we understand that because we've lived it, especially together as brothers in one of the greatest fighting forces in the world. But I think this is what we're talking about, these intersections and this solidarity of service. And that's what you have in the Marine Corps, but it translates what I've seen in the last 10 years to everyday Americans who want to serve too.
And I think that's the secret behind successful transition. Even though many of us have to have the uniform ripped off of us, what doesn't disappear is the brother and sisterhood, the unique way that the Marine Corps culture becomes who you are, not something you're in. You become part of the culture.
It's part of you,
and you never give it up. So for those who have a hard time transitioning, a lot of it is that detachment or sense of detachment. But if we can stay connected, especially with the people that influenced and shaped us, I think it goes a long way. And the work that you've done in veteran unemployment, and now building communities through partnership and finding common ground is an extension of that. So I think that the Marine Corps has served society well by, number one, shaping you as an officer, but also giving you the tools to do the same thing once the uniforms come off. So speaking of service and nonprofits, that was your second act when you got out of the Marine Corps, and I got to sit in a front row seat to watch you through at the part that I saw at Hiring Our Heroes. But talk to us about that, because you could have done a lot of things. You could have probably made a whole lot of money in the private sector doing many things, but you chose to serve, and you explained a lot of it. But why nonprofits? Why that space that tends to be occupied by folks? They're mission driven, but they're not always the right people. But you have a way of making nonprofits successful structurally, but also finding that heart within the organization to make it special. And I want to hear more about how you've made these nonprofits a reflection of you and what drew you to that sector.
Yeah, so I'm going back to something I said earlier about General Jones and how fortunate I was in the transition process, because at the time when I was transitioning in 2009, I remember we were walking through the building in the State Department to brief Condi Rice, and he asked me where I was going next, and my family was going next, and I said, I'm not going anywhere, I'm retiring. He was a little bit shocked to hear it because I didn't talk about it, because I knew that would be his response. But the very next day, I got a call from him and said, hey, I want you to come to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And he was leading an energy security institute at the Chamber. And he introduced me to the president and CEO, Tom Donahue. And literally the next day, I had an offer from the Chamber to be the chief of staff and work directly for Tom Donahue. And essentially do the same thing for Tom that I did for General Jones at NATO. And I traveled around the country and around the world and met with CEOs and world leaders about business. And I learned a lot about the private sector and what issues businesses are focused on. And after doing a job like that for 2 years, you're always asked the question, what do you want to do next?
Right.
And it was a great question because I had the perfect answer and I wanted to serve again. And when Tom asked me, what you want to do, I think he had in his mind that I would go to the international division in the Chamber, or maybe even go to energy security, or an issue that may have been more aligned with what I did in the military and my background. And I looked him in the eyes and I said, the Chamber, I would love to start a program to help veterans find employment. And, you know, Tom is like, well, we're not the Department of Labor, we're not the VA, that's not what we do. And I said, we absolutely do that. And every meeting we've been in, Tom, CEOs have said, we love hiring veterans, we want to hire more. And the chamber is the largest business federation in the world with state and local chambers all over the country. We need to do this. And they gave me a small office, and I started traveling around the country, and I found like-minded people like you and people in corporations who are military veterans who were running their employee resource groups. And we formed a community of doers, of people who believed in hiring veterans because they were incredibly talented.
Right.
And I think back to my time in enlisted assignments and talking to E5s and below and the challenges they had. They didn't even know what they were going to do next. And I think about my own son who, you know, enlisted right out of the Marine Corps and chose to serve our country with a 3.8 average, coming from a middle class, upper middle class family, and he could have gone to college, and he chose to serve our country, and he's going to interview for a job, just like the thousands of Marines we saw, and he's got to step back on them.
Right.
And we created a grassroots movement that, you know, went in communities across the country, and we solved for an issue that our country had with veteran unemployment, and I was part of an organization that did that. I know a lot of people say, well, he founded that program, he was the first executive director. For me, I was part of it.
Right.
And it took a lot of work by a lot of great people. But with that said, it showed me that I could serve in a different way. And I actually, before our Operation Gratitude, I actually did work outside of nonprofit work, and I was really unhappy. I lost my sense of purpose, and I found it again with a small nonprofit called Thanks USA that does need-based scholarships for military families. And a couple years into that, in October of 2017, almost 3 years ago, almost to the day, I did a Zoom call like a lot of us are doing right now with our founder, Carolyn Blashik, under the premise that I was giving her 3 names. And 2 hours later, I agreed to be the CEO. And what this organization does is analogous to what Hiring Our Heroes did, just solving for a different problem. And that's solving for a divide that exists between civilians and our military veterans and first responders. Not a lack of appreciation, clearly. That divide is not based off of a lack of appreciation. We have 1 million volunteers who want to express appreciation to those who serve, but it's a lack of understanding, a lack of empathy for service and the sacrifices that are made by men and women in uniform and their families. And we can do what we did at Hiring Our Heroes with Operation Gratitude by building a community of doers, people who serve, that want to give back, that want to make connections with our military veterans and first responders, who want to have a better understanding, who are empathetic through service, through that common bond of service, through solidarity of service, by doing an event together where everyone shares in that common bond, that solidarity, we can bridge those divides. And that's why I'm here. And that's why I'm so happy to wake up every morning. And I know, because I went away from nonprofit work, that this is my life's calling, and I probably will never do anything else again. So it's nice to be in that position too, because I felt the same thing as a Marine. And I think that's really important for people to hear. You don't have to wear a uniform to serve. That's what I've learned first and foremost in this organization.
I think one of the common themes, as I followed your career, not just as a participant in many of the endeavors, but as an observer, somebody who was watching the leaders and wanting to take the best of what they could show and apply it myself. You really have a knack for bringing together communities that have different missions that don't appear to intersect in many ways. I think it was that first event where I heard you speak where I met Elizabeth Dole, and she was just beginning her Hidden Heroes effort. I met Bonnie Carroll from TAPS. I met Linda Davis. These are people I still have relationships with.
Intersections.
And I'm telling you, and at that meeting, it was more consequential than I would ever have thought, because today, you know, I'm Elizabeth Dole's co-chair on the Federal Advisory Committee. I talk to Linda Davis often in her role as Veteran Experience Officer for the VA, But it all began that day. In fact, I have photographs from that day, and we all look so much younger.
Amen.
We've been conditioned and weathered by the work, and you all look beautiful still. I mean, that's in no way a reflection of the vigor that you still bring to the job, but in those rooms and with your speech setting the tone, that has carried over in Operation Gratitude, because even in the time that I've worked with Operation Gratitude at the 2019 event in January, a lot of those relationships still carry forward and flowered into things
Sure.
that I didn't see coming.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I truly believe in the power of partnerships. We partner with the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. We partner with the VA. And that's because of relationships.
Right.
That's because of relationships with Senator Dole and Steve Schwab. That's because of relationships with Linda Davis. And the fact is, if organizations, nonprofits, government agencies, the private sector partner and work together, they can achieve a greater impact.
Yeah.
And every American wants to see that too. So it's a big philosophy that I have as a nonprofit leader. I believe in the abundance mentality and not scarcity. I think there are lots of people who probably don't think that that's a great strategy, but I've seen it work time and again. And if you build community, if you believe in the power of partnership, the reality is you will achieve a greater impact. And you shouldn't worry about losing funding or losing volunteers or
Right.
losing anything, because if that's where your heart is, if that's where your mind is, the rest will follow.
And impact is the only measure that matters.
That's
Not
it.
awareness, those are tools to get there, but having that meaningful change in whatever area of interest is the most important reason for a nonprofit to
Absolutely.
exist. So you embodied that greatly. And your organization at the Chamber was called Hiring Our Heroes, right? And at that time, we were thinking about people like Justin Constantine, Dakota Meyer. I mean, those are legendary people in our mind. But that's easy. That's an easy label to slap on somebody who is a bona fide hero in many respects. But I think there are people in this society that are regarded as heroes because they scored a winning touchdown or they did something neat. But heroism has to mean something more, especially in times like this. And I wonder what your definition, besides the ones that we all know about, what does it really mean to be a hero in your eyes?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bringing up Dakota, we have that photo from that first event you're talking about, bringing up Justin, and you talk about Justin Constantine. What about Justin Torelli, right? We are so fortunate through our service and the roles we play in the nonprofit sector to be exposed to heroes in the classic sense of the word. And we've read the citations for Medal of Honor recipients. We've met face to face with people who told us stories about them being in a firefight in Afghanistan and saving lives at the risk of their own life. We've heard people like Justin Torelli and firefighters, and I think of them, and my definition of heroes goes beyond that to also include people who serve others, because I think that's the one common theme. All of those people put service to others before themselves. They rush to the danger. They rush to the danger because they're thinking of others first. And to me, and we said it before, heroes don't necessarily have to wear capes or a uniform, right? Heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and I've seen it more with Operation Gratitude than any other organization in the country. I've seen people go above and beyond because they've been called to serve. And the underlying current is they want to serve others. They're empathetic, and they realize what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. What's really interesting about our organization is they are inspired by heroes in the true sense of the word, or the stereotypical sense of the word, right? They don't even realize, because they are just like Dakota and Justin. They are just as humble, right? They are exactly the same person, except they're wearing an Operation Gratitude t-shirt. Yeah. And they hand knit 500 scarves in one year. They make a couple thousand paracord survival bracelets. They handwrite hundreds of letters. That's heroic. Or organizing their community. We have a volunteer today, a military spouse who was the recipient of Operation Gratitude's care packages, her children in her squadron, and she arranged that event. Today, she is organizing an event in her community, bringing together civilians, veterans,
Right.
military, and first responders. So the answer to your question is it's people who serve are my heroes. So, and I'm just glad that I can serve alongside them.
And we need a lot more heroes today. We need a lot more.
Amen. Amen to that.
You know, and akin to that, the idea, it's not actually a label on an individual, but it's an action. It's the characterization of one's intent. And so I think of the word courage when I think about, you know, it's one thing to be a hero, but it's another thing to put courage on display. And again, you can run toward the sound of danger like the firefighters and police officers did on 9/11, like the frontline healthcare workers are doing for COVID. But talk about courage in that same context. Is it what when you talk about courage within the framework of Operation Gratitude and what we do? What are some of the ways you would define courage in this environment and in some of the work that you're doing today?
Yeah, so I can't remember the words. I guess the exact words. So I'll paraphrase a little bit. But there are two great quotes by presidents, both ending with the name Roosevelt. The first was by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and it starts with the words, "Courage is not the absence of fear. It's being able to overcome that fear because you want to serve others."
Right.
And every single person I talk to, those names that I mentioned, Dakota, Justin, Constantine, Justin, Torelli, on and on and on, the people that we've met, Medal of Honor recipients, they were afraid.
Right.
They had that fear, but it was inside of them that they needed to do something for someone else that helped them overcome fear. That's courage. And the second quote by Teddy Roosevelt talks about courage not being the strength to go on. It's going on when you don't have the strength, right? And again, I'm paraphrasing, but people can go and find the quotes online pretty easily. The reason I bring that up is really what we see with COVID-19, because heroes, again, came in all different shapes and sizes, right? And they were wearing different uniforms. We've included doctors and nurses, but you think about frontline workers and what they're doing, and they are tired, fatigued, fed up, just like every American in this country right now. And they are demonstrating tremendous courage every day. And the reason they have the strength and the resolve to carry on is because they know that they have the support of grateful Americans through organizations like Operation Gratitude, who demonstrate with their actions that they do recognize what they're doing right now for our communities and our countries. And that courage to carry on is what makes America great.
Mm-hmm. And I was talking to Paul, who's one of our great Operation Gratitude ambassadors, in addition to being on your senior staff, about one other way that this organization inspires courage. And it happens when you have that box show up before an individual who may have had a hard time or maybe having a hard time. And because this demonstration of compassion hits him in the heart, they then have the courage to reach out for help when it didn't seem like that was the courageous thing to do. Sometimes we as Marines think about courage in terms of enduring hardship and not showing weakness and things like that, but we encourage people and inspire people to reach out, demonstrate courage, and ask for help when they need it so that they're in a position to help somebody later on. And I think that's kind of there's a hidden meaning of courage in there somewhere that makes people who are having a hard time courageous enough to say, I need help.
I think it's great. That would be a great thing because we're going to interview Paul on our third podcast. So we should talk about that. What we're really fortunate to see when we touch someone's life and we make an impact at the individual level is they share that with us. And it does take courage. For me, my favorite story actually occurred this May. And we received this email from a young soldier who was in Korea. And she had been deployed for a year, 12 months. And she received a care package. They were quarantined in South Korea in Daegu, in Area 4, since February 19th.
Wow.
She received a care package the first week of May. She sent us a beautiful photo of her smiling with her care package, this beautiful email. And she shared with us that she just found out the week before that her deployment would be extended for 3 months. And for 15 months of her son's 23 months on this earth, she would not be with him. And she took the time to tell us that that care package changed her life that day. And that she had the strength and the courage and the resolve to carry on. So when people say, oh, that's just a care package, or that's just saying thank you, it goes well beyond that.
Right.
And to me, those stories are all about courage, right? And the fact that we're influencing that in a way that only very few of us can understand. And then we're sharing that story with our volunteers, right? We send that picture to them, and there's this full circle of gratitude, which is why this name is so cool, right? Operation Gratitude. Right. Because that is what's happening. There's this complete circle that's occurring. And that's why we've grown to 1 million volunteers, is because people are reinforced in knowing that they're making that type of impact. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So we're going to shift gears, and one way to light up Kevin Schmigel is to
You're scaring
talk
me
about
now.
your kids. And you know, we've talked about your dad and the influence he had on you, some of your role models, but there are these little people that were related to by birth that are both embodiments of everything we believe in, but they're also extensions of us. And you talked about your son in the Marine Corps, but I want to hear about how you see your progeny and what you're leaving society in your wake, which is real important, because we have a lot to offer society in our service, but we also pass down that sense of duty to our kids. And can you talk about your kids and how did they inspire you in the home every day when you get up to do this work? Oftentimes they're watching this and they're not always here when you're doing it, but what do you think about when you're doing this work and what they're seeing?
Yeah, so I'll start with Carl and get that out of the way so I don't start crying and people don't hear that wavering in my voice. I think for me, one of the most emotional times in my life was watching him graduate from boot camp. Just, you know, seeing him raise his right hand and take the oath, and how proud I felt that he was serving. It's something I'll never forget. I think it's really important because it helped me find my way to Operation Gratitude too, because when I reflect on why I joined this organization, of course it was to solve for a larger problem and bridge divides, but part of the reason was because I had seen so many Marines who weren't like Carl. The fact is, I was there the day Carl graduated from boot camp to see him raise his right hand. I was there 6 months before when he went to the recruiter's office, right? And he signed the paperwork to say he would become a United States Marine before he went to boot camp. And I certainly sent Carl care packages and letters when he was in the schoolhouse or when he was deployed. But you know it, right? We've seen thousands of Marines. I've seen thousands of soldiers, sailors, airmen, when I was deployed to 50 countries who never got care packages, who never got letters because they went in the military to find a better way of life. And to be honest, part of the reason I'm at Operation Gratitude is to give them the support that my son had. My son's transitioning out of the Marine Corps right now and going back to school, and I see some of the same things in him that I saw in a lot of young people. So it's really hard for me just to think about some of the struggles he's having with that, but he's got a dad who supports him, and you kind of see all your life's work kind of come together in your own kids, and that makes me proud. But I have two other sons, Luke, who's 25, and Jack, who's 19, and I think this is what's most encouraging about this generation is they want to serve too. I think millennials as a whole want to serve more than any other generation. Right. So when we talk about the greatest generation serving, we should pay close attention to our kids. And I'm so proud that Operation Gratitude gives kids ages 4 all the way to people 104 the opportunity to serve, because I see the impact that it's making. And it makes me so proud. But, you know, for Luke and for Jack, they've been at Operation Gratitude events, and they serve in the communities too. I go back to a conversation that I had with Luke when he was, I guess he was 14 or 15. And I had been working pretty hard. I had left the Marine Corps, and I guess he might have been a little bit older. I was starting Hiring Our Heroes. And about a year into it, I had been working really, really hard, probably harder than any time in my life. And I apologized to him and Jack, who was probably 8 or 9 at the time, that, you know, I promised to spend more time with you. I'm spending less. And he turned and said, I'm proud of what you're doing, Dad. And it's important, right? So it's pretty cool. And that goes to my point. Like, they're called to serve too, and they grew up around it, and it's important that we teach our kids that.
One of the biggest thrills I had was bringing my 6-year-old son to the Operation Gratitude event last year and watch him dutifully, without question, get in line, and he understood what he was doing. He understood
he was on a mission.
He was on a mission. So that event became another reason for my family and I to connect, get behind something that we could do together and make a difference. So certainly your kids have reason to be very proud, and probably...
See, you got me to cry, Sherman Gillums Jr. I knew you would do it.
You know, I used to give a lot of speeches as a drill instructor to my recruits who were graduating to become Marines, and my goal was to make every single newly made Marine cry.
That's right. It's the best way, or the parents.
That's right. Which wasn't that hard, by the way, because that's often. But here with your children, you're creating some. They're already great Americans, but they're going to be leaders at some point, and hopefully, you know, we'll have that opportunity to show you that what's the seeds you planted were well planted. So I look forward to seeing that as well.
Yeah, me too.
And I guess the best way to wrap up what's been a great conversation about you and your life and contribution and the way you've shaped parts of society. You know, we use quotes a lot in the Marine Corps because it links us to history. It also gives us something to think about that's easy to remember and shapes how we think. I don't know if I have one quote. I have one or two that I really lean on, but is there a quote that stands out to you as one that has informed either your worldview, your work ethic, something you've said to people a lot? Do you have that one quote?
Yeah, well, you put me on the spot because I tried to quote 2 presidents and I failed there, but there is one thing that comes to mind, and it's not what the listeners are going to expect, because I could talk about speeches that I've heard from famous presidents or famous generals and people who have worn the uniform. But this happened before I actually became a United States Marine. And I actually had jumped out of airplanes at Fort Benning, Georgia when I was a sophomore in college in between school years. I'd actually finished OCS. And I came to a point when I was a senior in college where I was actually having doubts about my decision to serve and what I was doing, which is not a great time because they had paid for my first 3 years of school. But the life lesson quote that sticks in my mind and will stick in my mind forever was actually from the Jesuit priest who taught at the College of the Holy Cross, a guy named Father Lebrun. And he's a legend at Holy Cross. So you can ask anyone that's ever gone to that school when he was alive about Father Lebrun. He had a thick Irish brogue. He had a Stetson hat. He had a cane that was, handmade. And he would walk around the campus and he would yell like scripture, Yahweh, Alleluia. and he would just light up your day. And one day in November, it was a cold day at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, can be pretty miserable. This rain that would come down, it would hit the tree, it would turn to ice. And I was walking in my black uniform on a Tuesday night. I was coming back from drill as a midshipman. I was the XO of the battalion. And I was having these doubts because I saw all my friends on campus having fun, right? And talking about what they were gonna do.
Right.
Go to law school, go to med school, have this really cool job on Wall Street. And I was like, wow, did I make the right decision? And, as fate would have it, I could hear, I was soaked through my black uniform and my white cover, and I could hear this cane. And he was coming down the hill, Father LeBrun. And he said, "What's troubling you, my son?" I could remember it like it was yesterday. And we're standing there in the rain, and I shared with him that I was struggling. And I told him why. And he paused and just kind of let it linger, right? And then he took a step past me and he touched my shoulder and he said, "We are all called to serve in different ways." Mm-hmm. It's just one of those moments you never forget, right? And that gave me like this sense that I had made the right decision. And it's really been a guidepost ever since. I think about the times when I was deployed again, when I had my own doubts. I think about the times that I was with the young Marines who were doubting their service because we were deployed together. I think about all these kids I talked to in convention centers at Hiring Our Heroes. But mostly when I was deployed, I would remember telling them the same thing. "Hey, you made the right decision. This is why." And those words came to me. And even in my nonprofit work, I'm been called to serve in a different way. Mm-hmm. So you wake up some mornings too. We have these mornings, we have these weeks where we're like, why am I doing this? Right. Why am I working 100 hours a week? And in that moment, we'll get an email from a deployed service member who has received a care package like that young mom, right? And you remember why you're called to serve. The important thing is, that's what I want everyone listening to hear, that they're all called to serve in different ways too. And that's what we need more of right now. People need to hear that call and answer it. And they can do that with our organization. They can do that with any organization in my mind. And if they're called to serve and they answer the call, our country will be a lot better off. Our communities will be a lot better off. They'll be a lot better off, and the people that they make an impact on will be a lot better off. And they'll start to see the same things that we saw when we met each other, and we continue to see. Their lives will start to intersect with other people who they've inspired and who serve too. So it's an interesting story to share because it's probably a lot different from what people think, but I think it relates to what we're doing now and the whole notion of solidarity of service and the call to serve. So anyway.
Well, said another way, God qualifies those he calls, and he certainly qualified you with not only being a great human being, but a leader who is shaped by some great individuals that you've made proud, and your kids. I joined them. I couldn't be more proud of everything you've accomplished. And there's probably so much more we could peel back, but you've given us some insights into your life, so I'll relieve you from the hot seat for right now. But it's been an absolute pleasure to hear about what has shaped you, what keeps you going, and to see you continue to be an example for our country and our society at a time when we need a lot of examples. So thank you for the work that you've done. Thank you for the example you've provided to me and your friendship over the last 10 years. And I look forward to having many, many more great conversations in our future podcasts.
Yeah, me too. And I hope everyone listens in on our third podcast, Solidarity of Service, when we're going to feature our Chief Operating Officer, Paul Cuccinata, who now we both serve with in lots of different ways. So thank you.
And a Marine, Sherman, in case that wasn't clear, all right? So
never a doubt.
No bias. But,
never a doubt. All right.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, Sherman.